Hello and welcome to Herd Immunity News again. I'm Marcus Botza. Today is the 11th of March 2024. It's quite a significant day because the Reform Party, led by Richard Tices, have a new MP. Former Conservative MP for Ashfield and Deputy Chairman Lee Anderson has gone over to join Richard Tices and his band of merry men and women. Now, this is a big move because it gives the Reform Party their first MP, albeit that Lee Anderson won as a Conservative back in 2019 on the 12th of December. He's one of the Red Wall Tories that put Boris Johnson over the line back in 2019, giving him an 80-seat majority. Richard Tice announced Mr. Anderson today in London. And it was quite interesting to hear what Lee Anderson had to say straight off the bat. One of the first things out of his mouth was he spoke about the dangers of the election of George Galloway in Rochdale. That's the veteran MP who has really taken the electoral system by storm, or he's taken the British politics by storm, as he always does. And his win in Rochdale was nothing short of miraculous. Now, many people are accusing Mr. Galloway of galvanizing the Muslim vote, looking at and taking advantage of the genocide going on in Gaza. But hey, folks, that's politics. There's not an MP born who hasn't taken advantage of a situation. And many will be fans of Mr. Galloway, and the Workers' Party are going from strength to strength on the back of what Mr. Galloway said. We'll get into Mr. George Galloway a little bit more in a moment. But as your maiden speech, for your maiden speech as a member of a new party, to go after another candidate and another MP who's recently won is mad. It's insane. With all the problems and the crisis that we have in the UK, let's look at them. We've got mass immigration. We have net zero addiction that's crippling our economy. We have an unelected Prime Minister in Rishi Sunak. We have Keir Starmer, who's really like a carbon copy of Rishi Sunak himself. He's a World Economic Forum devotee. He's a globalist. The Labour Party of old can't relate to this man. He is a Tony Blair disciple. He is from that cloth. He will go on record in places like Davos and say that he can get more done in Davos than he can Westminster. So when we look at what's now on the table for voters, we have a Reform Party that has between 10% and 13% in the polls. You have the Workers' Party have thrown their hat into the ring with an incredible victory in Rochdale, as we mentioned, by George Galloway, who is looking to make hay in similar situations and similar demographics. Whether we think this is right or wrong, George Galloway is a fantastic orator he was right on Brexit for us. He was right on the Scottish independence argument, and that he stood against it. He was one of the loudest voices that stood against it. He stands against net zero. He looks towards immigration on a points-based system. He looks towards immigration helping genuine asylum seekers, but he certainly can't be accused of being in the same groupings as Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak when it comes to wide open borders and destroying our country day by day. So for Lee Anderson to go after George Galloway, and the exact quote that he came out with, we have here, he said that George Galloway coming into Parliament, we need to fight back as a country. He's basically echoing what the Uni Party are saying, what Labour, the Conservatives, the SNP have all said about George Galloway. Lee Anderson and Richard Tices are saying exactly the same thing. Now, there are many of us who want to see an end, of course, to the conflict in Ukraine. We see this as EU expansionism and also NATO expansionism. This has been on the cards for many years. And in some cases, we can say that it was always on the cards when America had weak leadership, uncontrollable leadership. And under sleepy Joe Biden, it doesn't get any more controllable. President Donald Trump, for many, is the difference maker. He will come in and he will restore the order that he had when he was president of the United States between 2016, 2020. We'll have to wait and see. There are many things that President Trump has done and activated that we don't agree with. Certainly, looking at his vaccine rollout and his vaccine mandates, we're totally against that. And on that very matter, Lee Anderson said that Britain should be proud of its vaccine history. He could have named anything. He could have talked about the Industrial Revolution, which he did. He could have spoken about our victories in battle, the British Empire. He could have spoken about any one of those things, but he chose to take on vaccinations, saving hundreds of millions of lives. And right now, that is a red rag to a bull for those of us that are looking into the injuries and deaths that these trial medications, deadly trial medications, have caused. We can see this through excess deaths. We can see it through all the most vaccinated countries are the ones that have the largest increases in blood clotting in the heart, brain, lungs. We look at turbo cancers. We look at people with increased coagulation of the systems. It's rife. It's rife right now. So Anderson's come out on the wrong side of the argument for us by attacking George Galloway. We thought that was kind of pathetic point scoring to look at the situation in Gaza right now. He's also back in the war, as Richard Tices is doing. So it remains to be seen whether this is a fantastic move for reform or not. They finally got an MP, albeit not through the ballot box. They're very concerned, of course, looking at the last election results for them in Rochdale, where their candidate, who was a former Labour MP himself, had a shocking backstory. He was accused of and found to be sex texting a 17-year-old in Rochdale, of all places, which has clear issues with grooming gangs, which we'll come on to talk about a little bit later. But to go after Galloway and back the vaccines right off the bat is shockingly worrying, and it's something I think it's going to end up being a complete mess for the Reform Party. Deputy Leader Ben Habib has some very interesting comments as well on Mr. Anderson, in that he isn't a fan of the language he used when he blamed him for clumsy language at best when Lee Anderson was describing how London Mayor Sadiq Khan has been hijacked by Islamists. Now, we're no fans of Sadiq Khan here at Herd Immunity News. We think he is an individual who's all into totalitarianism. We've gone in and done a deep dive on the ULEZ program, the ULEZ scam, with the money that's passed hands between Imperial College London, people like Professor Kelly, Professor Fuller, Sadiq Khan, the narrative that 4,000 people are dying. It's actually only one. We have massive concerns about Sadiq Khan, where he's taking London and where the Labour Party will take the United Kingdom, off a cliff edge and a cliff face. So voters are going to be looking more towards Reform Party as the alternative to the Conservatives. They may well be looking to the Workers' Party of Great Britain, led by George Galloway, as an alternative to the Labour Party, because both are, as Mr. Galloway says accurately, they're two cheeks of the same backside, or they're like two world economic peas in a pod. So Reform going head-to-head with Galloway, well, that's putting Tice against one of the greatest orators in British parliamentary history, in George Galloway. No one can accuse or should accuse Mr. Tice of being a fantastic orator. You may well say, well, where's Nigel Farage in all this? Nigel Farage is keeping his powder dry. He's staying back. He hasn't ruled out anything, from starting a new party to becoming a Conservative to going back into Reform and replacing Richard Tice. When Ben Habib is obviously waiting in the wings as well. Ben Habib came very late to the game with Reform, joining very, very recently. We've interviewed Ben Habib and have a lot of respect for the man. He seems to get it right, where Mr. Tice, unfortunately, whether it be on associations with Matt Hancock or going over on trips, junkets to Ukraine for brownie points from the Uni Party devotees, he seems to be getting in a fluster and a lot of confusion. And the move to bring in Mr. Anderson looks very desperate, as far as we can see. Whether it works or not, who knows? There'll be a by-election along very, very shortly, and we'll get to have a look at the scores on the doors. But the attack from Lee Anderson on the democratic process, where George Galloway was elected, getting 50% of the vote. He had more votes than the Labour Party, Reform, Conservatives, Lib Dems combined. Even the independent candidate came second, who did very, very well, Mr. David Tully. So the hypocrisy from Anderson here is that he left a Conservative Party who had a foreign minister that wasn't even an MP. David Cameron, unelected, parachuted in for one of the most important jobs in the United Kingdom, especially when we're on a war footing, especially when we have wide open borders. And it was also a bit rich that Mr. Anderson did not have a go at Rishi Sunak himself for being unelected. The 1922 committee, as we well know, gerrymandered Sunak in as Prime Minister over and above Liz Truss, who had our 49 days or whatever it was in office. Beyond pathetic that this happened, Conservative members were not consulted when it came to the election of their leader. The Reform Party as well have never had a leadership election. Many, many people who follow Herd Immunity News are members of the Reform Party. We've interviewed Richard Tices, Ben Habib, Howard Cox, the London mayoral candidate. We've interviewed Dave Holland, one of their parliamentary candidates, and also Noel Wilcox, the scaffolder who took on Sadiq Khan and won. Look, they're all good people. The members that we've engaged with are strong on, they're Brexiteers, of course, but they're strong on our national sovereignty, parliamentary sovereignty. They are going nuts with the crisis that we have facing us through open immigration, net zero addiction, culling off our manufacturing sector, high taxes, people like Jeremy Hunt, laced in power with globalist agendas to cripple our country. Many of us see these people as fifth columnists and negative assets for our country. The war in Ukraine is critical right now to get a resolution on this. Not only have nearly 500,000 white Christian men been butchered, but there's also the collateral damage from the cost of living crisis and the life expectancy of everyone else throughout Europe and the Western world, throughout the United States, the UK and Europe. And why do I say this? I say this, of course, because excess deaths are now at 15% in most vaccinated countries. We have a cost of lockdown crisis, which is hammering every sector and every function of government in the United Kingdom. The cost of living crisis has a direct effect on life expectancy. We can already see that it's going down. It has done for the past couple of years. But this doesn't seem to be one of Lee Anderson's issues. This doesn't seem to be a massive matter of importance for the Reform Party. Another interesting aspect was Andrew Bridgen's situation. When Andrew Bridgen came out and spoke about excess deaths, he's been the loudest voice from Parliament when he was a Conservative MP, talking about the side effects, the dangers of the vaccines. Andrew's been into a few things, and he's a very clever politician, and he's set himself apart from the rest of his peers. Perhaps only Mr. Chope, another Conservative MP, has spoken out on the damages done by these deadly trial medications for COVID-19. So the Reform Party had a chance to bring Andrew Bridgen into the fore as the Conservative Party withdrew the whip and threw him out, but they weren't interested in him. The comments that were made in relation to the Holocaust, something that he retweeted. This is very, very telling indeed that Richard Tice is not interested in anyone who is critical, overly critical of the COVID-19 vaccinations. Of course, his partner, Isabella Auchenshott, wrote a book with Matt Hancock, the former health minister, the demonic man who brought in midazolam in bulk. He wanted children injected, even though they didn't need to be, with these trial medications. They went against the Joint Committee on Vaccine Interventions and Vaccine Injuries, saying that children younger than 16 should be vaccinated. It is a vile disgrace of an excuse for a human being. We can't forget that during the COVID era that he was only interested in letting people fly as long as it was a one-way trip to Switzerland. So for those of you like us that believe these people are death occultists, you're pretty much on the money, whether it be late-term abortions, pop-up vaccination centres. Remember, we saw them all over the shops with places like TK Maxx and Asda Boots. Non-qualified people injecting innocent members of the public that were terrified into taking these trial medications. Now, the line in the sand for us is also the attitude that they have towards war in Ukraine and the conflict in Gaza. Mr. Tyson Reform are pro-Ukraine. They're pro-Zelensky. For us, this is EU expansionism. It's also one of the biggest money laundering rackets of all time. He's aligning himself with sleepy Joe Biden, formerly the instigator of a lot of these problems, Victoria Nuland, and people like Boris Johnson, Keir Starmer, Rishi Sunak, the awful pyramid scheme dwarf, Grant Shapps, Ben Wallace. You know, there's just Liz Truss. There's an endless ream of these completely insane individuals who have bought their way and shimmied their way through their shiny knees to the head of the Conservative Party. And Starmer's not much different. So it's interesting to see that we have this situation right now with Starmer looking towards a battle with George Galloway in the Workers' Party of Great Britain. And on the other side, you have World Economic Forum weasel and Place Minister Rishi Sunak going against reform, with Lee Anderson taking up into a decent position from the red wall areas. There are other parties out there, of course, that will be looking to make hay out of this. Scotland and Wales are different propositions. In Scotland, obviously, we're looking at Labour versus SNP. But for today, we felt like we'd do a little video on Lee Anderson, Richard Tice, George Galloway, and where they are all positioned coming into the election, which could be as early as May. That's what many, many people are predicting. So there's a couple of months to go. Anderson has been speaking with Richard Tice from our insiders in the Reform for some time now, and he's just been waiting for the right moment. Deals have obviously been done between Mr. Tice and Lee Anderson. We don't have the specifics on this, but that's politics. It happens in every single party. There'll be conversations going on through all of the smaller parties right now with disaffected Labour and Conservative MPs. It's not out of the question that some people may even leave Labour or the SNP and align themselves with the Workers' Party. More likely to be Labour. They're watching George Galloway to see what he's doing, of course, and he's making ground. They're watching the Reform Party as disillusioned Conservatives, waiting to see what Mr. Tice can offer them by way of deals. We don't have that information right now, but you can be rest assured that it is going on as we speak. So let us know what you think about the signing of the former Conservative Deputy Chairman, Lee Anderson, MP as a Conservative for Ashfield. Will he retain his seat? He had a 11.7% majority when he got into power or became the MP in 2019. Will he retain it? Will George Galloway stay where he is in Rochdale? Many people think he will. He's making great progress as we speak. All is out in the open and remains to the winner, the spoils. He who dares wins. All of those speeches and conversations are very, very true. Where George Galloway goes, we predict that the Reform Party are scared that Mr. Galloway is actually going to take a lot of voters away from them as they align themselves with him. They see him as a threat to the floating voters, to the disillusioned Labourites that will never vote for Keir Starmer. But the Habib replacement of Mr. Tice may well encourage a lot of people in to reform. We ran a poll not so long ago. We got nearly 900 voters, and Ben Habib was given a 90 to 10% lead over Mr. Tice as leader of the Reform Party. Now, whether that happens, we'll just have to wait and see. I doubt it, because the Reform Party is Mr. Tice's vehicle into the House of Commons. He came very close in 2019, but didn't get across the line. So we will be watching like hawks here at Herd Immunity News to see what happens moving forward for the Reform Party, Conservatives, Labour, and the Workers' Party of Great Britain, led by Mr. George Galloway.